Tara Brown and the Swinging London Colour Revolution by Vic Jenham, Chapter 7, Part 1. The fun of driving through a big city is very much time-bound. As all modern readers know, getting stuck in the rush hour is a nightmare for any sports car owner. So you don't want to be there at the wrong hour. Back in the days, there were not too many rules and traffic was milder outside the peaks. Central London could be had at reasonable speed in the daytime and double the pace at night. The problem was that many streets and roads were quite narrow, which meant you were held up easily even on a quiet hour. In Paris, where my experience had been more that of a scooter rider with a handful of car adventures under his belt, we enjoyed wide boulevards which allowed fast cars to continuously overtake the slower ones. When it got too busy at certain places and times, everything would clog up, but the boulevards could handle quite a lot of cars before it all came to a halt. They were an efficient way of getting through town. In London, there were a lot of poor drivers and a sizable elite of rather good ones, who unfortunately, for both sides, had to share the same lane with each other. The fearsome were happy to shuffle through the streets in their little cheap cars, while the fearless, and in all fairness those included quite a few low-income drivers who were risking their everything to get home in record time, would use the slow as obstacles in a steeplechase, jumping from one to the next as fast as possible, pushing them aside as there was often not enough room to be polite. Paris, which was the capital of a republic, had an efficient way of dealing with difference, creating two classes of road users. London, by ignoring the problem, gave the public the chance to create some kind of order themselves, which ended up being an extreme and less efficient version of the French example. On our holidays to France, I would deliberately take the long road through Paris to enjoy the boulevards to the maximum. After that, I made my presence felt on the 3 lanes. While driving in Paris was relatively safe, though quite a few chauffeurs wouldn't hesitate to cause slight contact if it could gain them positional advantage, in London the danger of a major crash always loomed. Paris was built for the DS and other high-quality family cars. London was for roadsters. I can't really say I prefer one over the other. Cities must be useful to most, and Paris certainly wins in that field. But London had a special attraction to people with money, and I belonged to that lot. Nevertheless, keeping other users out of harm's way was a minimum requirement. You were allowed to freak out if it hurt only you. This had been the motto of rich people throughout history, and if someone unfortunately did get caught up in some rich kid's adventures, then there was always the sum of money to change hands, to satisfy for damages, as the expression went. Every inadvertent move, every misjudged action, every falsely assumed responsibility was recalibrated to an amount of cash. It meant your money could only hurt you if you had little of it. If you had lots of it, money was nothing but a convenience. Being able to hand out enough money to stay out of trouble was a prime incentive for reckless behavior. To my eternal shame, I must confess, I destroyed quite a few cars in my time. I never meant to crash them, though. It was always inadvertently and all too often because some frightened fool didn't anticipate the speed of my car. Yet I was forced to change wheels at alarmingly short intervals. Had I felt less protection from my family trust, which was there for costly needs while my parents procured my pocket money, I might have driven more carefully. As it was, I was able to enjoy myself. I would often start out on the King's Road past Mary Quan's store. More shops and studios were happening in the neighborhood. People were trying to build up an individual life away from the city center and their childhood's conventions. I know, I have nothing to say about this matter, as I began posing as an adult as soon as I could speak. I spoke their language, see, as they wouldn't speak mine. At World's End, you can go either way, depending on your destiny and need for speed. In those days, there was no fast way out of town. There was heavy road construction going on, and we had some stretches of racing fun, but you had to suffer a lot before getting onto them. Taking the inner city route, I would usually go past Buckingham Palace and left up to Piccadilly Circus, which was still mostly rule-free, the square with a Roman flair. Then it was business to stay out of traffic, which required knowledge of diverse lesser street routes which had their hours and days of guaranteed freeway, apart from the highly incidental offloading truck. Evading them was the name of the game. That's funny. If you think of London, you can think of anything between the street and the whole big picture. But however you look at London, the city is never included. It's something else, apparently. In our view, central London was west of the city and to the north as well, up to Islington, which was getting back into fashion after a long period of decline, and then westerly towards Notting Hill, Hammersmith, some nearby streets on the south bank, but not too many. That was our terrain. That's where most of my days played out when we were in London. And it was true for many. It was the area where London swung. Nowadays, all of London has become central London. I left the Beatles aside but kept buying their new releases. With the Beatles was interesting in that the mindless happiness of the first album had turned into songs about longing and heartbreak. Of course, all songs ended well, but after the initial courting, the four Fabs were now lecturing the public on their desires. And the girls seemed to love it. The screaming had by then not in any dimension diminished. Nicki pointed out the meaning of the sleeve photography, which was mostly black, with the Beatles only partially appearing in what must have been sharp studio light. She said, "You can see only half of their faces. It's as if they have only one eye, especially George and Paul. John not so much. That's supposed to mean something. There are books about this stuff." "Which you haven't read." "Neither have you." Nicki was right, of course. The Beatles were meant to be, so there could be nothing spontaneous about their image. It was either connected with some sort of signaling, or it could be considered a fashionable adaptation of a trend some photographer had prematurely spotted somewhere. It depended, I guess, on what you wanted from life. Did you need the positive outlook to be able to fulfill your dreams? Or would you rather know the truth and damn the consequences? When it came to the latter, the Rolling Stones were your band. Meanwhile, the Stones had released their first single. Theirs wasn't half as tightly produced as the Beatles stuff, but it sounded authentic. It sounded like five guys wanting to be heard. They were from London as well. If London was going to be the center of the modern world, it couldn't have its musical tastes dictated by some northern backwater. That's how people were thinking in those days. Not many used to travel wide. People were bound to where they lived, their town, their street, so they promoted their own thoughts. Why think of anything else? So yes, the Rolling Stones were on to something. Come on, I knew as a Chuck Berry song that hadn't done much some 2 years ago, a bit formulaic for the maestro. The Stones managed to give the song a new vibe by offering 5 individual approaches. Whereas Berry was the sole hero of his show, the Stones gave each other the chance to shine, and always would after that. Jagger's singing is expressing a real desire. Whatever it is he is looking for, he needs it badly. And he was singing really well, not by pop measures, but by blues standards. I understood why the society were interested in Jagger. He seemed to know what was expected of him and he delivered. He would deliver big time because he did everything he did with taste, be it good taste or bad taste. Unbelievably, the Stones followed up with a Beatles song, I Wanna Be Your Man. Jagger sings it well, but the song lacks the honesty they were looking for. They are typecast here as the somewhat unruly little cousins of the Fab Four, the joke went. Nevertheless, the band was on fire and Brian Jones offers a gorgeous slide guitar solo. They were certainly better than the Beatles at this point. Their debut album, which was a covers compilation with one song of their own, underscored the Stones' desire to play good music. They were style over substance, certainly, but they were mostly attitude driven. Little by little, we were opening up to other cultures, different ideas, understanding people had come to our town for a reason. They were the ones that added something or did not. The ones who didn't were invited to simply embrace the results of our intercultural breeding. One of the more successful breeding grounds was the Roaring Twenties, down in a basement in Carnaby Street, where they played ska, the uplifting and exciting music from Jamaica. Going there was becoming hip under white boys. It was a scheme that worked well as long as people were new to each other. Over time, we started noticing lesser appreciated customs. Integration the hard way, among people who had enough problems of their own not to be appointed caretakers of the process. That wasn't always easy. For me it was, of course. I was rich and observing, but for many it clearly wasn't. I understood that and wanted to be aware of it. At the same time, I never spotted a lack of interest. We knew why these people were here, sort of, and we totally understood their decision to come over from their point of view. So welcome you are. It's not your fault that you're here. Londoners had to deal with Welsh and Scots, and Irish and Jews, and assorted others. Endless loads of French, who had all found their place in the end, who had mingled and created new realities, and who had been the foundation of what London was to become. It had been an ongoing movement. The war I had just been born inside of, wetting my heels when long jumping the ditch, as they say in Amsterdam, the proverbial narrow escape, had produced lots of movement in the world. It was only natural to accept the way things had gone. There was no turning back anyway. I guess I felt outsider enough to show an interest in other outsiders. At the same time, I accepted people who had difficulty with the concept. With all things going on the way they were going on, with the growing belief that London was doing well, that we, its inhabitants, were doing well and creating new realities while we were experiencing them, an open air laboratory for tomorrow's trends, my task clearly was to add a positive vibe to it all, to help things smooth on. And while I was at it, vibing away in the thick of things, I just felt I might use my position of influence to do something which was unquestionably good for our town. Nothing big or fancy, just wielding influence in a local decision. It wasn't something Sir John had asked me to do, it just wasn't costing me much, as I had never done much else. Happiness included. People knew me, and I knew them. Let's see if something came up. To keep so many people together, you need music. At least, that was the electric drug of our times. Everybody was listening to music whenever they could, and we mingled on the dance floor, liking the same songs. When you spend a large part of your life on dance floors, as I was doing, you start to see life as a sequence of unexpected occasions you need to be on a dance floor for to appreciate. The dance floor has become the center of your universe, the go-to place whenever you feel the need to mingle. On the dance floor, everybody gets the chance to leave an impression. It's quite democratic in that sense, as is, of course, the act of love. A favorite hangout became the Flamingo Club in Wardour Street, around the corner of Leicester Square. Admittance was quite expensive for many, but they had great bands performing there. The club had been the scene of a famous fight between a musician and a jazz promoter who was moonlighting as a pimp, about a call girl they both had been involved with. It must have been quite a rowdy affair, with knives flying and one of them receiving a life-threatening cut. But the real reaction came when the press dug into the story and managed to pull up some of the names the call girl, Christine Keeler, was frequenting. It turned out that among them were a Russian naval attaché and a cabinet minister, John Profumo. As was to be expected, out of the blue the British press invented the theory that state secrets might be exchanged by means of Keeler's boudoir, a story which inescapably led to Profumo's demise. I felt for him. He just seemed a handsome bloke who was having it off for money. So what? Flamengo had all-nighters at the weekend, when they opened till the morning and offered dance music instead of their usual jazz. Not that I didn't know how to dance on bebop, we just liked our pop hits more. Apart from American R&B, there were quite a few hits that year which made it onto the dance floor, not because they were particularly good, but because there was something about them that made them stick. I'm thinking of the Tremolos, the honey rock of Bill Fury, Buddy Holly's irresistible brown-eyed handsome man in Reissue, the mesmerizing Maureen Evans, Shirley Bassey because of her voice, even the Searchers, Del Shannon, and the Ronettes made it. There was lots of good music coming from the United States and some out of England as well. Buddy Holly had another posthumous hit with Bo Diddley. Chuck Berry stayed visible with Memphis, Tennessee, and of course the Dave Clark Five. The Hollies, who were pretty rough in their early songs. Billy Davis, Dwayne Eddy, and Dusty Springfield. I hadn't much to do with getting such records into the local jukeboxes, as they were domestically produced and had their own distribution channels, but I kept being active on the American import market. As long as records weren't released globally, and they weren't even for the bigger acts, there was money to be made in the time gaps between successive issues. In my case, I made influence. They were a string of acts charting which I had helped promoting, and I felt good about that.